over here. There we go. The whole reason I'm using Ecamm is to make it, and so I don't really have to clap my hands now either. Okay, cool. So let's talk about creating content. I know that this could be one of the hardest things for people to do, for people to come up with. I've been told that it's strange or unique that I come up with as many ideas for content as I do. And actually, there's a podcast I love called Deliverability Defined. It's by Alyssa and Melissa over at ConvertKit. And I was talking to Melissa at at Craft and Commerce, and she told me that they weren't sure if they were going to bring the show back because they couldn't think of ideas. And so I was like, I got you. And I sent her a list of 36 ideas that they could do for season 3 of their podcast. And they recently told me that because of that list, they are going to do a season 3. So really excited about that. Really glad I could help. But a lot of times coming up with content can feel like this, right? Where you're just sitting there waiting for an idea to strike. And if you're doing this for your niche, for your mission, then there's that extra pressure to think, well, does this align with my mission statement? Am I vying too far, or moving too far off of the path of what this show is supposed to be about? And again, that pressure when you're trying to come up with an idea for like that week, could give you stress and could lead to burnout. And so today's session is going to be about putting a system in place where you're coming up with ideas, you're logging those ideas, and then when it comes time to record, you're not starting from scratch. You're starting from a place where you can pick the things that are most relevant to you. So the slides are here. I'm probably going to talk a little bit more about my own system, but there's a whole section with like 11 videos in the playbook, which if you're watching this, you have access to it, on creating consistent content. So if you need more context for anything I talked about, obviously you can ask questions here, or if you're watching the replay, on the comments. But if you do take a look at the creating consistent content area, there's a lot of stuff over there too that I'm summarizing a little bit here. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about logging ideas and then taking those ideas and turning them into episodes or episode titles, essentially. Then we'll get into outlining, and specifically we'll talk about outlining versus scripting. And then I'll give you some tips for recording. Originally, I was going to say like we're going to record on this, and we could still do that, but this is really packed, and there's like a couple of work on your own sections. So if there's time, we can record together, but I'm going to guess that if you're watching this and coming up with the ideas and then the outlines, you might not quite be ready to record now. So we can play that part by ear. So first, let's start with coming up with ideas. Like I said, I come up with a lot of ideas. For a while, I was doing like 6 different content channels. I was doing a live stream on YouTube. I was doing 2 YouTube videos, 1 for each channel. And then I was doing 3 podcast episodes per week and a blog post. It was just too much. It was basically all I was doing each week. And that meant that I wasn't really selling my product or my client work or anything like that. I was just kind of hoping for sponsorship. And that worked for a little bit, but it didn't work for the long term. But all of that is to say that I did spend a lot of time coming up with content ideas. And so I want to talk about a little bit how I do it and how you could do it as well. So first of all, this is Don Hahn. And actually I spelled his name wrong there. It's H-A-H-N. He is or was the producer on movies. He works for Disney for movies like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King. And I met him in 2013 at a D23 event. This is like Disney's fan club. And they have an expo every 2 years, which is a lot like Disney Comic-Con, pretty much. But he was there. He was signing autographs. I read his book. I'm a big fan of his work. And I asked him, I said, how do you come up with unique ideas? Because I was in web development at the time, and I felt like all of my websites looked the same. I was just kind of redoing the same thing with different colors and fonts. And he told me to look for inspiration everywhere, especially places where I'm not normally looking, right? So the specific thing for websites that he recommends I do is buy books on art and look at artwork. Buy books on, there's a book called Everyday Design, and look at how those things were designed and the principles of design. And that will get me thinking about design and then eventually web design in a different light. And it should help me yield some unique design ideas. And that worked. I bought like a few coffee table books that I would just kind of look at, in my free time. And it really helped me generate some ideas for design. So the first thing I'm going to recommend to you here is look for inspiration everywhere. So you probably consume like a lot of industry content. Look outside of your industry and your target audience. One example of this for me is I'm a huge Friends fan. I'm a 90s kid, 90s guy, I guess. I can't say kid anymore. I was a kid in the 90s. And I loved watching Friends, and I was watching it recently. I watch the entire series all the way through, at least annually. But I was watching an episode in season 1. This was about halfway through season 1. And it was a 2-part episode where they're introduced to Phoebe's twin sister, Ursula. And the funny thing about that is that Lisa Kudrow played Ursula on another NBC show, a more popular one at the time because it was more established, called Mad About You. And so in universe, quote unquote, this is not the term they used in the 90s because that wasn't the term in the 90s, but in universe, Phoebe and Ursula both existed in New York City, and they were sisters. They were twin sisters. And so Chandler and Joey go to, I forget the name of the restaurant at this point, but they went to the restaurant Ursula worked at, and they discovered Phoebe had a twin sister. Later that episode, Helen Hunt and Helen Hunt's best friend from Mad About You showed up as their Mad About You characters at Central Perk. And that was a crossover event, right? And the cool thing about this was at the time, Mad About You led into Friends. So it would be like Mad About You at 8:30, Friends at 9 or something like that. Or Mad About You at 9, Friends at 9:30, something like that. And so that was the first episode of a 2-parter. In part 2, part 1 ends with Rachel having to go to the hospital because she hurt her ankle. And in part 2, they go to this hospital and they meet 2 young doctors played by George Clooney and Noah Weil, who were the stars of the very popular medical drama ER. They weren't playing their ER characters because that was based in Chicago. But I'm telling you all of this because this event led me to create a Twitter thread, a blog post, and a podcast episode about why doing podcast swaps and guesting on other people's podcasts is a great way to grow your podcast. Because after that crossover event on Friends, their ratings went through the roof. Like millions more viewers watched after those 2 episodes. So I want you to look for inspiration no matter where you are or what you're watching and think, how could this apply to what I'm doing? But that's only half the battle, because you need a place to log those ideas. You can't just think, oh, I should do that, and then go to sleep. You will forget it. You'll forget it. There's like the phenomenon of forgetting a thought when you walk through a doorway because the context changes. And so you need a system to log ideas. I strongly recommend, if you haven't read it already, Building a Second Brain by Tiago Forte. I read it over the summer. It came out this year, I think. I read it over the summer, And even though I have a system in place like this already, it really helped me organize. Like if my system was 80%, this book provided the last 20% I needed to get my note-taking situation in a place I'm extremely happy with. So I strongly recommend the book, but have a system for logging ideas. My system is I will say, hey, assistant, in my case, Siri, I have an idea, and that's linked to a Siri shortcut. And once I talk, it'll get whatever I say will get added to my notes app, Craft. So I'll say, let's see if we can do this live. Let's see. I'll say, open my phone up. I have a HomePod behind me, but hey Siri, I have an idea. Talk about building a second brain on The Profitable Podcaster. So there you go. That idea is now added to my notes area. And then the way I organize it is once a week I review all of my unsorted notes and I organize them and I say, okay, great, this is a great episode, or I discard them. I'll probably keep that one. That was a good one to talk about for the podcast. So your system doesn't have to be like mine, but I do recommend you having a system that makes it easy for you to log ideas wherever you are. The shortcut works for me because if I get an idea while I'm driving or while I'm cooking dinner for the kids or the few times a year that I go running, I could still log ideas. And so I can type them, but it's a lot easier for me. Or I think, did I say driving? Driving is like the most common one. I can just shout an idea into the void and I know it'll get logged in my system. Once you have those ideas, right? And this is part of the organization process. Compare them to your mission statement, right? So last week we talked about the importance of defining a mission statement. The last part of your mission statement is there should be a goal for each episode. And that goal should be the solution to the problem your podcast solves. So I need to evaluate and you need to evaluate your ideas based on that mission statement. So does talking about building a second brain jive with my mission to help podcasters grow and monetize their podcast by showing them expert tested systems? I think it does, because consistency is really important if you want to grow your show. Consistency is really important to show sponsors and members and anybody who might give you money for your podcast. Consistency shows them that you're dedicated to showing up, and logging ideas is at the root of that consistency, because there's nothing worse than sitting down the day before you need to make an episode happen and looking at a blank canvas. So I think that idea falls in line with my mission statement. Just like the Friends idea fell in line with my mission statement, because podcast swaps and doing podcast interviews is, in my experience, the best way to grow your podcast. So take those ideas, compare them to your mission statement, say like, oh, does this fall in line with my mission? Does it help solve the problem I'm trying to solve with my podcast? If yes, you can move them into like an ideas folder or move them onto a note where you just look at that before you record. Or if not, you don't have to delete them. In the building a second brain method, there's a folder called like research or archive, and you can move it into the archive. So it's still searchable, but it's kind of out of the way. And then maybe later, 6 months down the line, you're like, oh, what was that thing that would make a good idea for a YouTube video, right? So that's my system. I don't have a nice summary, but the summary is basically look for inspiration everywhere, log ideas in whatever system works for you. I mentioned Craft. It could be Notion. It could be the Notes app on your phone, which is great for most people. It doesn't need to be voice assistant. It could be a pen and paper. I keep a field notes notebook on me when I'm out too. And so sometimes I'll just kind of scribble it down in that and then check that later. But the voice assistant thing and the dictation has really been working for me lately. Once you have those ideas, log them, and process them, compare them to your mission statement. So let me take a quick break here and see if there are any questions in the chat. I don't see any. So we can move right along to the next part. Now, that's great for like future systems. For today, if you don't have a list of ideas, right? Because I'm going to recommend at the end of this, you take 10 minutes to think of like 20 ideas, right? And I know that sounds like 20 ideas in 10 minutes. That's 2 per minute. Once you get rolling, like you could probably do that in less than 10 minutes. But here are some ideas that I recommend to people if they're struggling to come up with ideas. Talk about things you like or lessons you've learned or where you currently are in your journey. Again, as it relates to the mission of your podcast. So things you like is not just like my favorite, diabetes friendly ice cream, right? That's I have that. But I don't, that's not part of my mission, right? But like recording tools I like or note-taking apps I like. And actually I have an episode coming out of The Profitable Podcaster next week that is like my favorite tools for making a mini podcast. It could be lessons you've learned, right? So a lesson I learned this year, podcast swaps are gangbusters for growth. Do more of those. I share that. Or where you are in your current journey, right? So this could be like experiments and things like that. Listeners like relatable, right? So interviewing Aaron Judge for your podcast is great, but not a lot of people can relate to Aaron Judge. In fact, as of this morning, nobody can because he has signed the biggest deal in free agent baseball history, right? So Aaron Judge is a unique individual. I'm a huge Yankee fan. But it could be like, you can interview, Elon Musk was the example I always used here. And I feel like he's fallen out of favor a bit. So, but you can interview somebody who's huge and well-known in your space, but that person's not relatable. Talk about where you are in your journey and it's more relatable. News, current events, and analysis, right? When YouTube announced they were getting into podcasting, I covered that on my podcast on the Profitable Podcaster because it made sense for growing your podcast and getting discovered. Recommendations, problems you've recently solved and how you solved them really lends to your credibility. Something you're currently struggling with, profile important people in your industry. This doesn't necessarily mean interview them. It just means like, hey, here's a few people that you should follow aside from me if you want to get better at your craft. Or these are people that I've learned from that I think you can learn from too. Sneak peek and behind the scenes. People love behind the scenes stuff. What else are you working on? So like services or products you might sell. I'm going to be moving into 2023 more open about experimenting with my own podcast membership to see if I can get more members as part of that. And I'll be sharing the results and the experiments on the Profitable Podcaster. And then listener involvement. And this doesn't necessarily mean bringing on listeners to talk to them, but if you give them a way to write in or questions you get from Twitter or social media, make a list of those questions and answer them on your podcast. I recently did this. I said for my birthday, I want to answer as many podcast questions as possible. And aside from the people who are like, do what you want on your birthday. And I was like, I am doing what I want on my birthday. I just said I want to do this. I got like 15 questions and I took those questions and I answered them on social media. And then I had great content for the podcast. So I ended up answering those same questions on the podcast for people who don't follow me on social media, but listen to the show. So those were a few quick ideas. These slides, of course, in the replay will be available to you if you want to see them again. But I also have in the playbook, in the resources section, there is a PDF of 52 podcast episode. It's actually 52 plus because it's like 52, but then like examples or like sub examples, 52 plus episode ideas for you, for your podcast. So, if you're struggling to come up with ideas, this PDF is freely available to you as a member of the playbook. So with that, what I want you to do right now, if you're listening to the replay, pause, take 10 minutes to come up with a list of 15 ideas for episodes. And these don't have to be fully fleshed out. They could just be like a few words. Talk about Friends crossover. Talk about the Para method. Idea logging. Whatever. Just a few prompts for you to come up with some episode ideas. So pause the video here, and then we'll come back. Okay, so now that you have some episode ideas, let's answer one of the biggest questions I get when it comes to creating your mini podcast. Should I do scripts or should I do outlines? And I'm just going to say right at the outset here that I prefer to do outlines. I don't do scripts for my videos either, with the exception of my LinkedIn Learning videos, because I have a producer reviewing those scripts to make sure that they properly follow the right format. And when I'm creating an entire course, doing all of the scripts ahead of time does generally make it easier for me to record the entire course in one day. And I'll also say, like with the courses, they're programming based courses most of the time. And so I need to do the actions anyway to make sure I'm saying the right thing and at the right time and using the right terminology. So in that instance, it makes sense. It makes sense for me to script. I know some people who prefer to script because, we've got the pros and cons here, right? So let's go through them really quick. Scripting, you say exactly what you want to say and you won't forget anything important. I think these are the two biggest benefits of scripting. And I know people who want to script for that reason. You can also reuse that script as a blog post, like pretty easily. And I was doing this with my WordPress focused podcast for a while. I would write basically a long form piece, blog piece, and then essentially narrate it for the podcast. And I did it that way because I found that people were more likely to share the blog post. Like that audience was more likely to share the blog post than to listen to the full episode. And so I wanted to create both pieces of content. So scripting it made sense because the blog post was more shareable for that audience. And that's usually because those pieces got picked up by like WordPress news sites. And so they would prefer to quote the article or link directly to the article. So you can reuse it. And then with scripts, there's going to be fewer ums and ahs, right? You write the script, you know exactly what you want to say. So you're not taking that moment to think. And so you can pause and then you'll have fewer ums and ahs, which, you either won't have to remove or just generally won't have. I have been doing this a long time. I think I'm pretty good at not saying and ah a lot. I know I just said it. I'm pretty aware when I say it. So some people are not. And so scripting really helps with that. However, scripts are a lot more time consuming, right? You're probably going to spend a lot of time writing the script because you're trying to get things worded the right way. You know that this is going to be the thing that you read. And so that in and of itself could take an hour or so. I know people who spend hours on blog posts and scripts. So that could take a lot of time. Also, if you are not practiced, it could sound unnatural or canned. I think if I had to guess, if I put a scripted episode of a podcast and a non-scripted episode of a podcast of mine side by side, most people would be able to tell when I was reading and when I wasn't. And then it's still going to require editing. So you're adding to the process. You're not cutting production time by scripting it so that you won't have to cut out as much, because you could still, I still mess up scripts and I need to edit that part out anyway. I think it's maybe a slight benefit with an outline because you're not trying to say exactly this thing, right? This is one of the things that I learned when I was speaking publicly. Don't try to memorize everything you want to say. Think of the overall points, and then you won't worry about, oh, I skipped that part and get all messed up, right? And lose your place in your mind for where your talk is. So the script will be in front of you, right? Unless you're doing, and if you're doing a video podcast, you don't want to look like you're reading, but we haven't really talked much about video podcasting here. But you're still probably going to have to edit. Versus outlines. Outlines are basically like brain dumps, right? Of what you want to talk about. And so they're faster to create and work with. It's easier to ad lib or update in real time because yes, an outline is the things you want to cover. But if you think while you're recording, and maybe this takes practice, again, I've been doing this for a long time, but when I think of something I want to add as I'm talking, I don't think, oh, I have to stop recording and update the script now. I think, all right, I'm going to mention this now and then move on to the next part of the outline. And that feels more conversational and natural sounding. So I think that scripts have a place for fictional podcasts or historical podcasts, especially because you want to get that right. So I don't know what that sound is. You want to get that right. But with a mini podcast where it's you and your expertise, you definitely want to sound natural, right? You want to sound like you know what you're talking about. Now, the cons of the outline are it could lead to more ums and ahs as you're thinking about how you want to string these thoughts together. You may require a practice run. I know some people will do a practice through of everything, that, like a non-recorded, just like, oh, I'm going to talk about this and then move through that so that they feel more comfortable when they do record. And it may require more editing, right? If you find like you mess up a lot, you're not quite saying what you want to say the way you want to say it, you may require more editing there. In my experience, again, I'm very comfortable talking. Outlines have worked really well for me because I can do 3 or 4 outlines in a row and then record based on those outlines. Whereas if I'm writing a script, usually if I'm scripting and then recording an episode, that's an entire afternoon. Because I'm writing it, I'm proofing it, I'm usually getting a friend to proofread it because I'm terrible at proofreading my own work. And then when the script is at a good place, then I'm going to read it and edit it and upload it. So that's me. I wanted to share a couple of outlines with you, and I'm going to switch to the bigger screen layout here so you can maybe see them a little better. I picked these 3 for a reason. The first one that you see on the left here, what is dynamic ad insertion? You see that this is pretty long, and that's because this is a topic that I wanted to cover, but I don't necessarily feel like I'm an expert in. It's just something I wanted my students or my listeners to be aware of. So I have some extra notes here. This one would have benefited the most from a script. But I did want to include, like, how can you use it? It's not just for ads. What is it? I say right open with Marco's tweet. That's Marco Arment, and he talks about like how crappy dynamic ads sound in some instances. And then tell the Dispatch story. So I listened to a podcast called The Dispatch, and their dynamic ad insertion got all messed up. And for a while, their pre-roll ad, which was a pre-roll is before anything, right? Before even the intro. We heard the wrong ad get run, and it said, let's take a break and talk about our sponsor, whoever. And we're not taking it's like when like Vanilla Ice says Ice is back with a brand. Like, where are you back from? What are we taking a break from? So if you're not paying attention to dynamic ads. Anyway, so I have those notes. This is not about dynamic ads. So I have those notes, and this is a little bit longer because I wanted to make sure that there were more points I included. Versus, if you're talking to no one, who are you talking to? This idea came from, I was walking my daughter to the bus stop or driving her to school. It was like one of those. And I was muttering to myself. And she's like, what? And I said, nothing. I was talking to myself. And she said, if you're talking to no one, who are you talking to? or why are you talking? That's what it was. If you're talking, it's written right there. If you're talking to no one, why are you talking? And I turned that thing, logged the idea with my system, and I turned that thing into the importance of a mission statement and starting a mini podcast with a hyper-focused message. So that was like, I recorded that episode the same day. Like I was like, this is great. And I outlined it really quick and I created the episode. And then, so that was just like more of an opinion, sort of whimsy idea that I thought was fun. And then finally, why should you use Descript for your mini podcast? This is the most outliney, right? Because this has got the major points and then the sub points, all things I wanted to cover while talking about Descript. And so, again, this could have maybe benefited from a script, but this outline is in depth enough, and I know enough about Descript that the outline got me a 20-minute episode. So I think outlines are great. I strongly advocate for them, because if our goal for the mini podcast is to reduce the amount of work that we're doing while still producing a podcast, and if our goal is to produce a month's worth of content in an hour and a half or 2 hours, then scripting does not work for that goal. So that is outlining. I will say my secret lately has been to use my Twitter threads as outlines, essentially, because I'm creating these threads anyway. And then I could take that content and use it on Twitter, on LinkedIn for my newsletter, and as the outline for my episode. So the episode of The Profitable Podcaster that comes out tomorrow as I record this is about brand awareness campaigns, which is the Twitter thread that I released yesterday. So that's another thing to think about as you're creating your outlines and your content. If you've got a presence on social media, how can you reuse or realign that content? I think that this has been a really great system for me. And it doesn't work all the time, right? Because again, I'm trying to record several episodes at once and I'm not trying to produce like a Twitter thread a day. That's so much work for, I don't think, a lot of payoff. But I'll usually pick like my best Twitter thread that week and turn that into an episode and turn that into my newsletter. So if you're posting on Instagram, like Instagram stories or reels, think about, is this something that I can turn into an outline and then turn into a podcast episode? So now it's your turn. I want you to take 20 minutes or less. I say 20 minutes, but to pick one of your episode ideas and create an outline for it. You can be as broad or as detailed as you want. So you can just, take the major topics, the headlines, or you can make the headlines and then make the subpoints. The idea here is that you have a bunch of episodes for something that you are an expert in. You probably have content for that already. And if that's the case, use that content as inspiration. But take some time and create an outline for one episode. Again, go ahead and pause this video and then feel free to share your results in the chat below or in the comments below. Alrighty. And then here. So I'm back to recording again. I probably should be addressing the camera. I'll edit that part out. We'll fix that in post. All right. So you have your outline now. My recommendation for your next steps are to pick your top 5 ideas, maybe top 4 now if you've just created an outline, and create outlines for those top 5. That way you have 5 episodes ready to go, and then record 1 or 2 of them, maybe just 1, right? Record 1 of them and let me know how that felt, right? How it went for you. If you want to drop a couple of minutes of the recording or send me an episode and I'll listen to a couple of minutes of the recording, feel free to do that and I can give you some feedback. But our goal for between now and the next week is let's get you a little comfortable with recording, so that we can go off and create our first couple of months of content. Next week, we're going to, I wrote killed, not killer. We'll create our killer call to action and record that separate from the episodes. This is part of the reason I wanted you to do the episodes and the episode ideas first, was I wanted you to get a feel for creating the content. But the call to action, because spoiler alert, I'm going to recommend Buzzsprout for your hosting, right? And that's what we'll do in week 4, is actually sign up and get a lay of the land for that. Buzzsprout allows you to dynamically add a pre-roll and a post-roll, like a pre-episode piece of audio and a post-episode piece of audio. And so your call to action doesn't need to be baked in. It's called recorded with the rest of the episode. What if your call to action changes in 6 months and you have an outdated one? Buzzsprout solves that problem. So we're going to create our call to action next week. We'll cover what makes a good call to action, what your goal is based on your mission. Let's get my hands in frame here. And then we'll script it, and then we can exchange notes on the script. I'll provide you a couple of my calls to action so you can see some examples. And this is going to be the thing that helps you get to the next level of actually making money with your mini podcast, right? Your call to action should be the drive for, we'll talk about this more next week, but it should be the drive for people to take action on all the great stuff that they're learning from you. But your next step, outline 5 episodes minus the one you just outlined, and record at least an episode to get feedback on it. And again, if you do that and send me a link to the recording, I will listen before week 3, and I'll provide some feedback for you. So that's what we can expect for our next steps in next week. And now it is Q&A time. So if you are watching the replay and you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I was told that if I leave comments, you don't necessarily get an email. So I will see if I can force that. Otherwise, be sure to check back before. I'll try to do it by like the end of the day, Tuesday, right? Which is before our week 3 Wednesday. So, but yeah, that's leave questions and I'll answer them again before the next session. But that's it. If you have, Anna, I'll throw it to you since you're here live. Do you have any questions about next steps?
For the recording, if we've already signed up for Descript and have that, should we just do it in Descript, or is it better to do it over a different thing?
Yeah, great question. I would record in Descript.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know if the question is going to come through on my main recording here. It should actually, because I'm getting all the computer sounds. But just in case, should we record in Descript if we've signed up for that? I think yes. There again, like the week 0 session, right? Was how to use Descript and why you should use Descript. I think that's the easiest tool because you're highlighting and deleting text essentially. That said, if you are experienced recording and you have a better app an app that you think is better, record in that. I'm not here to ascribe tools. I'm here to recommend them. But yeah, I strongly recommend Descript. I record everything in that now, including video. And I just think it's like the easiest to edit there.
Cool.
Awesome. All right. So I will end the Ecamm Live recording.